Hello, my name's Ian. I have a company called IAB Tours, and today, in collaboration with Free Tours by Foot, I'm going to be taking you for a walking tour through the centre of historic Oxford. Oxford is one of England's most picturesque cities. It is also England's oldest university town. The university here has a history of more than 800 years, and we're going to be enjoying some of the famous, beautiful architecture, some of the great views of the city, and we're also going to be getting away from the main streets and squares to explore some of Oxford's hidden medieval lanes and courtyards. To find out more about me and my tours and all of the different things that I do, check out my website and my social media accounts, and there's links to all of those in the description underneath this video. And if you enjoy the tour today, and I certainly hope you will here in Oxford, then you might feel you'd like to show your appreciation by buying your guide a coffee or something of that nature, and there is a link in the description that you can use to do that too. But for now, sit back, relax, get ready to enjoy historic Oxford, and let's make a start. We'll begin our tour just outside the old city walls at St Michael's at the North Gate, before heading outside the medieval city to see the Ashmolean Museum and St John's College. Next, we'll take a stroll along Broad Street to see Balliol and Trinity Colleges and the Sheldonian Theatre. We'll then duck into a small alley tucked away off Holywell Street, where we will find a quaint hotel and a tavern that dates back around 700 years. We then head back into the heart of the medieval city to visit the beautiful Radcliffe Camera and the University Church of St Mary the Virgin, before we take a stroll along the High Street to the Oxford Botanical Gardens and the beautiful Riverside Meadows. Finally, we take a walk along St Aldate's, where we will see Oxford Cathedral, Christ Church, Oxford City Hall, and end the tour in the heart of the modern centre of Oxford at Carfax Tower. We are next to the oldest building that we have remaining here in Oxford. It is a church tower. It is the church tower of St Michael at the North Gate. And this church tower is over 1,000 years old. It was an Anglo-Saxon church. And at the North Gate tells us this was the site of the North Gate of the medieval town of Oxford, which had a town wall. So let's set out on our journey, shall we? We are on Cornmarket Street, which is a reminder of the medieval markets that were held here in Oxford. It grew up as a market town for several centuries before the university ever came here. And we are at the moment outside the medieval town walls. The church in front of us is called St Mary Magdalene Church, and that was constructed to serve the expanding community of Oxford as the town started to grow beyond its original medieval borders. So it is quite a small church, but it was important in the sense of serving a parish outside the walls. Now, the university buildings in Oxford are scattered throughout the city, and that's because the university grew up and expanded gradually over many, many years and centuries, because there were more students coming here, the number of subjects that were being studied was expanding, and so on. So there were an increasing demands for university places. The university in Oxford has a unique structure involving central university buildings and colleges, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we have in front of us a memorial to quite a sombre event, but something that deserves commemoration. This monument is called the Oxford Martyrs Memorial, and it is in memory of three bishops, well, two bishops and one archbishop, Latimer, Ridley and Cranmer, who were burned at the stake in Oxford in 1555 and 56 for refusing to renounce their Protestant faith. So it was part of the Reformation, that conflict and long period of transition that eventually resulted in England and Britain moving away from the Catholic Church. But there was a lot of religious turmoil in that time, and those three bishops were burnt at the stake, executed for refusing to renounce their Protestant beliefs. So we are walking on Beaumont Street, and the building we see here is the Ashmolean Museum. The Ashmolean is one of the best museums in England, certainly one of the best you will see outside of London. It was built up over the years as the university and wealthy citizens of Oxford built up collections of artifacts and art and historical pieces, and this beautiful building, neoclassical building, was built in 1845 to house the collections. So whether you're interested in art or artifacts from the ancient world or history of this country here in England, there's plenty to keep you interested in the Ashmolean if you do come to Oxford and want to spend some time looking around the museum. Interestingly, the street of Beaumont Street, if we'd have been here 800 years ago, at the end of the street there would have been a royal palace. Two kings of England born here on this street in that palace. They were Richard I, known as Richard the Lionheart, and his brother, King John. So two kings of England from the late 12th and early 13th centuries, born in the royal palace here on Beaumont Street. This is not it, this is a hotel. This might be where their modern equivalents might stay. One of the nicest hotels in Oxford, currently under some renovations after a fire, but it dates back also to the 1840s. Yeah, another lovely view here of the Martyrs Memorial. I'm going to turn onto a street called St Giles. So it's named after a church that stands a little way along the road, St Giles, and St Giles has always been a site of large public events in Oxford's history, large livestock markets and fairs in medieval times, and it's still every year the site of a big fair, so a modern fair with fairground rides and sideshows and games and music and so on that takes place once a year. All of the roads here are closed, and along St Giles, along this lovely road here, tree-lined road, this fair takes place, the St Giles Fair. So we're on the northern side of the city here, and the buildings are a combination of buildings associated with the academic institutions and with the life of the city itself. So the university colleges, as I mentioned, they grew out of medieval communities of students who were coming to study here, and they grew out of monasteries. We do still have a monastery in Oxford that is nowadays part of the university, Blackfriars Roman Catholic Monastery here. But at the time when this university in Oxford was founded 800 years ago, education was a matter for the church, and so the places where people got an education at that time were either in monasteries or in schools attached to cathedrals and other important churches. And when the university was formed, the students grouped themselves into communities, and that was where they lived, it was where they ate, it was where some of the academic staff lived and worked alongside them, and that was the basis for the modern college system that we have in Oxford. So every student who comes to Oxford is a member of the university, just like any university. You enroll for your course, you go to lectures, you go to laboratory work, you do your examinations. The university provides library facilities and all of those things, and you do your final examinations, and if you graduate with a degree from Oxford University. But as well as that, you are also a member of a college, one of the 39 colleges of Oxford. That's where you live for most of your academic life. You can eat there. You will have a tutor designated to you in your subject who works and gives you tutorials within the college. And that's where your main social life is based. So it's this dual system. Now we've made our way along St Giles to one of the most famous pubs of Oxford. It's a pub called the Eagle and Child, although a more common name among local people would be the Bird and Baby. And the Eagle and Child is known because in the middle of the 20th century, it was a regular meeting place for a little group called the Inklings. The Inklings were academics working at Oxford who were interested in writing. The two most prominent members were two of our great fantasy writers, J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. Great friends the two of them were. And they and some of their other friends would meet up every week at the Eagle and Child, and they'd have a couple of drinks, maybe something to eat, and they would discuss the kinds of things they'd been writing, and they would read new things that they'd written to one another and critique each other's work and so on. So it was really the birthplace of a lot of what we read in Tolkien's stories of Middle-earth, and also in C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. So we're going to head back along the other side of St Giles here, and we can see a large college building behind the trees. This is St John's College, which was founded originally in the 15th century, although the buildings we currently see are 19th century buildings. And it was founded by wealthy merchants from London who wanted an educational establishment where members of their families or young people who are going to take over their businesses would be able to come. And it was known as one of the wealthiest colleges in Oxford because these very important wealthy merchants of the time were financing it. In more recent times, one of the best known students of St John's was a chap by the name of Tony Blair, who went on, of course, to become Prime Minister of England. By all accounts, Tony Blair spent a lot of his time while he was at Oxford trying to make a success of the music in a band he played in. He's had much longer hair and probably adopted a much less serious persona than he needed to in his political career. And you might see that the colleges are based upon medieval monasteries in terms of how they look, because when they were initially founded, there was this link between monasteries and education. So that was kind of people's idea of what an educational establishment should look like. It should look like a monastery. So they have these courtyards, which we know in Oxford as quadrangles or quads, and they tend to have a very elaborate gatehouse that gets shut up at night from a time when the world might not have been as safe as it is today, and you might want to make sure your student community is well protected. And they all have a communal dining hall, they have libraries, they have rooms where the students live and work, and they also have a chapel. So every college has a chapel, because for many years religious worship was an important part of day-to-day college life, and so that to this day remains kind of the design of particularly the older colleges. There are much more modern colleges that don't follow the traditional design, but certainly the older ones that we find around the centre of Oxford, they do follow this very typical style of college architecture and structure. The population of Oxford these days is around 150,000. So it has its historic university. There is actually another university here as well, called Oxford Brookes University. There's various other colleges and language schools and educational establishments. And about 1/3 of the population, perhaps even a little more, is made up of students. And as you can imagine, the university is a huge employer as well, because of all the services that need to be provided, not just academic teaching, but all of the maintenance of the buildings, the operation of the university administration and the college administration and so on. So it is a huge employer. And the students who come to Oxford, much more representative of the general population than would once have been the case. Traditionally, an Oxford education was associated with the establishment, wealthy families from maybe some of the leading private schools in the country. But these days there is around a 50-50 split in the student population between those who went to private and those who went to state schools. There is also around a 50-50 split between men and women. For the first 700 years of the university's existence, only men. Women were allowed to attend lectures in Oxford from the 1890s, but it was only in the 1920s that they were actually allowed to officially enroll and to obtain a degree and graduate from the university. But nowadays around 50-50. Now we can see here that it's pretty quiet in Oxford today. Not all the students are here at the moment, and we can tell that partly because the bicycle racks are not completely full to overflowing. Cycling is one of the most important ways that people get around Oxford. Obviously it's quite a small, compact city centre with a lot of very historic narrow streets, also quite a lot of pedestrianised routes. So you don't have your students all bringing their cars to university. The colleges built 800 years ago, they don't have much in the way of parking facilities, so students tend to get around by bicycle, as do academic staff, and so it is something you see a lot of. And these kind of large bike racks by the colleges and university buildings, how full they are is a good sign of whether we're currently in the academic term or not. So we are now on Broad Street, which is mainly a street of the 18th and 19th centuries. These lovely shops, many of them painted in very bright and breezy colours. Lots of places you can buy souvenirs and get a snack. Tourism, of course, is a very big part of the Oxford economy these days. Broad Street was also the place where those three bishops that I mentioned, who were burned at the stake, this cross on the roadway here, and the pigeons finding something to munch, that is actually the spot where the bishops were burned for their faith. So, here on Broad Street. Okay, we're going to take a look at one of Oxford's oldest colleges, but the buildings we see again are not the original ones, because the universities need to modernise the colleges. They needed to expand over the years, and well, like
all of us would be. College buildings are no exception. After the first few hundred years, they perhaps are tending to get a little bit tired and need a replacement. So this college is called Balliol College, and it is one of the three oldest. It was founded in around 1264, and the buildings we see here are the 19th century buildings, when Balliol went from being a college that had been quite down on its fortunes for a long time to being a part of a resurgence in academic standards of excellence here in Oxford, and that went along with the modernisation and expansion of their college buildings. So Broad Street is a very popular area and really pleasant place to spend a little bit of time. It isn't a pedestrianised street, but because there are pedestrianised zones all around it, it's not really a street where you get a lot of traffic. Cars have to turn off or turn around, so it is quite a place where you can, if you're careful of the bikes, walk in the middle of the road. Now you might be able to pick out a figure on the roof. Don't worry, that's not a person. It is a sculpture. And the buildings it's on top of are a modern accommodation block associated with Exeter College, which is the college whose spire of the college chapel you can see there. And that is a sculpture called, interestingly enough and imaginatively enough, Man on Roof. It is by Anthony Gormley, a very well-known British sculptor of modern times, and was acquired by Exeter College about 15 years ago now. So the college on this side, behind the gates here, this is Trinity College, and Trinity College was refounded because originally it was a college that was very much controlled and run by the Roman Catholic Church, and after the Reformation in England it was closed down, but it was refounded as a Church of England college. So it dates back originally to around the 15th century, refounded in the 16th after the Reformation. Trinity College, very beautiful grounds. Lots of the Oxford colleges have quite extensive grounds and gardens. They also often have land holdings outside Oxford, whether that's farmland or property that is rented from the colleges. And that's because over the years many famous and successful and indeed wealthy people have been associated with them, and they give donations to the colleges, or they make endowments, or they leave money to the colleges in their will. So from all of these finances, the colleges do have additional sources of income other than just what they're doing in terms of their academic work here in Oxford. So here's another part of Trinity College that we can see here. Trinity College is a little bit more open in terms of its plan than some of the others. Now I want to point out two things here to you. The first one is a little pub called the White Horse. This was another pub that was very popular with J.R.R. Tolkien when he was in Oxford. He spent most of his life living here as a student and then as a professor, but that is a beautiful little pub. Just some great local ales and some great food as well. Next to it, in fact on both sides of it, are two of the branches of Oxford's best known bookstore, Blackwell's Books. Blackwell's Books began life in the 19th century as a very tiny shop with only space for 2 or 3 customers, but now you can see we have a 3-story building. Well, actually we have more than that, because in the basement of Blackwell's here is a lower ground called the Norrington Room, and the Norrington Room stretches all the way over here under part of Trinity College. It's the largest room of books for sale in Britain, and it makes Blackwell's a much larger store than it appears from the street. Now, we saw the Ashmolean Museum a little bit earlier on our walk this morning. The collection used to be in this building here. This was the old Ashmolean building. Now it is a museum of the history of science, with lots of scientific instruments and all kinds of equipment and microscopes and astrolabes and all these kinds of things. They also have the chalkboard that was used by Albert Einstein when he gave a lecture here at Oxford during his career. So it is a very important building, as indeed is the building here, one of the most famous in Oxford. It is called the Sheldonian Theatre, and it was completed in 1669 by one of the most famous English architects, Sir Christopher Wren. Actually, at the time he built it, he wasn't yet a full-time architect. He was a professor of mathematics and astronomy here at Oxford, but he did a little bit of architecture in his spare time, and they commissioned him to create this building as a centre for the university's ceremonies. So even though it's called theatre, it's not a theatre where you go and see plays. It's where you will go and see official ceremonies of the university, and for everyone who graduates the university here, they go in a procession in their traditional academic gowns from their college to the Sheldonian Theatre, where they receive their degree certificates presented to them. Okay, I'm going to move around a little bit. So next to the Sheldonian Theatre is a building called the Clarendon Building, completed in 1715. This was originally the home of the Oxford University Press, so that is the university's own publishing house, so very famous for academic textbooks. Probably the most famous thing that they produce, though, is the Oxford English Dictionary. So that was the original home of the Oxford University Press, but over time they needed bigger and more modern facilities, so they moved out of this 18th century building, and it is now used for administration for the university, and particularly the university library, the Bodleian Library, of which more shortly. I'm we're going to make our way onto Holywell Street in a moment. A little bit like Broad Street, although narrower. It is a street that has a lot of houses that are beautifully decorated and painted in all kinds of colours. It has a combination of types of buildings along it, some academic buildings, some private residences, some student accommodation. So it is it's always quite a peaceful street, Holywell Street, after the hustle and bustle of the centre of Oxford, particularly in the summertime when there's a lot of people come to visit here, and during the summer vacations of the university, a lot of the colleges have summer schools where people from all around the world can come and study short courses here in Oxford. A lot of them also doing language schools where students of English from around the world can come. So it is always busy in Oxford in the summertime, and it's nice to find sometimes a quieter spot or two where you can just get away and enjoy the atmosphere of the historic city. I think we're going to get off the main street here, and we're going to turn onto a little street called Bath Place to find something of a hidden gem. So Bath Place, 17th century hotel, which is still in operation here, and you can see this is exactly how streets in Oxford and in any English city really probably would have looked several hundred years ago. Very typical kinds of houses and the cobbled streets, pretty narrow. There's the Bath Place Hotel. Really nice place to stay here in Oxford and off the beaten track. But another reason that people come down here is to make it to the infamous Turf Tavern. Now the Turf Tavern isn't as infamous as all that really. it is famous, and I suppose in some ways infamous, but it is an inn dating back to the year 1381, expanded over the years, but there's been an inn on this site since 1381, and it's always been very popular with students, with local people alike. If you are a fan of the English series of books or TV show Inspector Morse, Inspector Morse and his understudy Lewis, they often come to the Turf Tavern. The Turf is one of their favourite places to have a pint of ale and consider the case. It's also a place where two political leaders have had very notorious visits. One of them was the former Australian Prime Minister Bob Hawke, who set an Oxford University record that I believe still stands for the speed of downing a yard of ale, which is a big glass of just over 1 litre that you just, it's a student challenge to drink it as fast as you can. And Bob Hawke set the famous record for that. This was also a pub that frequented by Bill Clinton during his time in Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. It is the place where, according to his account of the story, he inhaled some certain smoke, but he did not inhale it all the way. He smoked it, but he did not inhale it. That happened in the garden of the Turf Tavern here. Bill Clinton and Bob Hawke, two of many, many very well-known political leaders who have studied in Oxford over the years. People from all over the world come here, of course, to study at this famous ancient university. You see that the Turf Tavern really is tucked away. But as we come out of here, we'll see another very famous landmark of the city, and that is this bridge, which is called the Hertford College Bridge. In the background, another view of the Sheldonian Theatre. And this bridge was built in 1914 actually, so it's nowhere near as old as it looks, to connect the older and more modern sections of Hertford College. It's known as the Bridge of Sighs, after of course the famous bridge in Venice, but actually the bridge in Venice that it most resembles is the Rialto Bridge. But it is known as the Bridge of Sighs or the Hertford Bridge. We get another view here of both the Sheldonian Theatre and the Clarendon Building. And within this group of central university buildings, so we've seen some colleges. These are central university buildings, administrative for graduation ceremonies, and the building here is part of Oxford's Bodleian Library. The Bodleian Library is the name of Oxford's University Library, one of the biggest academic libraries in the world and the second biggest library in terms of a number of books in the UK. Originally founded in the 13th century, but everything we see here added in the 17th century when it was expanded by a big bequest by a man called Thomas Bodley, hence the name Bodleian Library to this day. See the beautiful gatehouse of the Bodleian Library here. It leads through into the courtyard, and from there you can go into the ancient parts of the university library. Most of the academic books that would be most regularly used by students are not in that very historic part of the Bodleian. They would be in some of the more modern library facilities, the departmental libraries, or they are on order from the Bodleian's modern storage facilities that they have inside and outside Oxford. Now, talking of academic libraries, one of the grandest most iconic buildings of Oxford here, the Radcliffe Camera. What's a camera? Well, this doesn't mean something we take a photo with. A camera is an Italian word for a room or a chamber, and it was created as a reading room specifically for the natural sciences and for medicine. The money to build it and the person it's named after was John Radcliffe, a professor of medicine and a great doctor here in Oxford. The city's main hospital is also named after him, and he left instructions and a bequest to build this particular library. It's not accessible to the public. You do have to have an academic reader's ticket to be able to go in there, and the square is named after it as well. This is called Radcliffe Square, and the building itself, Baroque style building, was constructed by the architect James Gibbs. It was completed in 1745. Here we have a very typical example of a medieval Oxford street. Two colleges flanking it. So this is Brasenose College on the left hand side, and on the right hand side this is the walled garden. This is part of Exeter College and the walled garden. Now this is one of the only streets in Oxford where we can still see a little bit of the fact that this might not have been as pleasant in medieval times, because in the centre you can see that this is where the modern drains are. But hundreds of years ago, this would have been an open drain in the middle of the street where all the sewage and all the rubbish would have been. So it might not have been quite as pleasant as it appears to be today. So flanking the Radcliffe Camera on the other side is, to the Bodleian Library, is St Mary's Church. This was a parish church, a very, very ancient parish church. But when the university was established in Oxford, they kind of co-opted this church and started to use it as the university church, and the university funded the expansion and building of the church in the form that we see it today in the 13th to 15th centuries. And the Church of St Mary was the first headquarters of the university. It was where the ceremonies took place. It's where the first university library used to be. They had the university treasury in the crypt of St Mary's. So it has very strong links to the university dating back many, many centuries. On the other side of, the final side of Radcliffe Square to look at is All Souls College. Academically speaking, one of the elite institutions in the world. They don't have undergraduates or master's students, PhD candidates. It is an academic community made up entirely of fellows, so senior academic staff. Some of them are the leading, or most of them are the leading figures in their fields in the world. They are invited to be part of the All Souls community, to conduct their research here at Oxford and to get involved in the academic programmes here as well. So the beautiful towers of All Souls were designed by another very famous architect, sort of one of Wren's followers, a man by the name of Nicholas Hawksmoor. And they were added in the late 17th century to the existing 15th century buildings of All Souls College.
So if you're enjoying the tour so far, go ahead and hit the like button. It helps others discover the video. If you'd like to see more videos like this one, subscribe to our channel. We have walks along the Thames, through Westminster, Camden, all over London. Visit our website for more about our tours, our travel tips, and more. We also have virtual tours and channels that focus on DC, New Orleans, New York, and more. Look for free tours by foot wherever you travel. You can support your guide with virtual tips, links in the description, and let us know what else you want to see. Leave a comment below. Now, back to the tour.
St Mary's Church is still an active church. It's no longer owned and operated by the university. It is just a normal church. They do have a lovely cafe with beautiful seats in the garden as well. So there's another lovely place to take a break on a summer's day. Somewhere a little bit different from the kind of city centre restaurants that you might otherwise find Yeah, another beautiful view back to... Let's look at this side of the Radcliffe camera, the one that's not got the scaffolding construction work going on, shall we? This beautiful blue sky. Okay. So very popular, as you can see, the tables outside St Mary's Church. Sunday brunch, very popular. So in a moment we're facing a building called the Old Bank Hotel, another one of the very nice Oxford hotels here, with a very good restaurant on the ground floor. And we're turning onto one of the longest and best known streets of Oxford. It's called High Street. Nobody calls it High Street really. Everybody just refers to it as the High. It's a long curved street. It's not open to regular traffic, only to taxis, buses and deliveries. But for all that, it is quite busy because there are so many pedestrianised streets in Oxford that the roads that the buses are allowed to go down, they all go down them. So this is one of the sort of busy streets, but it's a shopping street. It's a street with colleges on and university buildings, a lot of history. With a college across the road here. This is University College. So I said that Balliol earlier was one of the three oldest. This is another one of the three oldest. There's a little bit of friendly rivalry. They were all founded around the same time, within a few years of each other, in the 1260s. And they have a little bit of competition saying, how do we define who's the oldest? Is it the ones who built the first building? Is it the ones who got their investment first? Or is it the ones who actually enrolled the first students? And depending on which way you look at it, these three colleges all believe they have a claim. University College is where the chap that I mentioned earlier, Bill Clinton, he studied when he was here in Oxford. It was also where one of England's most famous poets, Shelley, studied. Interestingly, there is a beautiful marble sculpture of Shelley in the courtyard of University College, celebrating him as one of the most famous students of the college. After he died at a young age, drowned, and strange that they're celebrating him as one of their most famous students, because he was actually thrown out of University College during his time here for his views on the political establishment and the religious establishment of the time. So he never actually studied here for that long. He was thrown out, but nowadays they celebrate him as one of their most important former students. Just goes to show how the story changes and people's opinions change based on subsequent events, doesn't it? Now I'm going to spin around in a moment and just show you the facade of a college that we've been walking past. It's a little bit too close to you wouldn't have seen much other than some blocks of stone, but I do want to show it to you because it is a lovely view along the high street here. So you see the spire of the University College that we saw from Radcliffe Square, but the college here that we've been walking past with a little domed monument on top is called the Queen's College. Now the Queen concerned is the person who founded it. It's a queen you might not have heard of. It is named after Queen Philippa. Queen Philippa was the Queen of England. She was the wife of King Edward III of England back in the 14th century, and she founded a college here in Oxford, and it bears her name to this day. Now opposite is the Grand Cafe. Still a lovely place to get a coffee, to get an afternoon tea if you want to treat yourself, but it is also known as being the very first coffee shop that ever existed in England. The famous diarist Samuel Pepys, writing in the 1600s in London, he wrote that the Grand Cafe, run by the Jacob family in Oxford, was the first coffee house in England, and then later the tradition spread and became a really important part of London society. Where would we be indeed without coffee shops these days? I wonder. Very tired. Now, talking of businesses along the high street that had a big impact, the building across the road that's now called Fitright, it's a shoe shop, stock clearance. That was originally a bicycle maintenance and sale shop, and it was run by a man by the name of William Morris, not the William Morris who founded the arts and crafts movement and was a philosopher and artist. This is William Morris, who founded the Morris Car Company. So originally he repaired and made bicycles here, and then he moved on to motorbikes and then on to cars. And that's one of the most famous Oxford brands, Morris. The Morris Oxford, one of his famous models, of course the Morris Minor, and the Mini most famously. And there is still a car plant in Oxford where Minis are produced to this day, albeit no longer under English ownership. So across the way, if you study at Oxford, this is where you go to take your examinations. The examination schools, built in the 19th century. The rules for taking your examinations at Oxford are quite strict. You have to wear traditional academic clothing, which means a suit, shirt and tie, and then a gown. And the type of gown will depend on your college and also what level of degree you've been studying for. Maybe some kind of headwear as well. You have to bear in mind that university examinations take place in the summer, but even if it's really hot outside, you have to wear that clothing, that traditional academic clothing, to go in there and take your examinations. And when a student takes their final examinations, it's a fantastic spectacle, because they come out of the examination school and it's a tradition that their family and friends all go and meet them and celebrate. Yeah, they haven't got their results yet, but celebrate the fact that they've completed their Oxford education and got to the end of their final exams. And they have bottles of champagne and they spray foam on them, and you can imagine it's a little bit chaotic, but it's such a scene of joy and relief after the hard work that they put into their studies over years to see that. Now we are walking at the end of the high street here alongside one of the largest of the Oxford colleges. It is called Magdalen College. Very, very large college buildings. One of the reasons for that is because they were built outside of the medieval town wall, so there was a little bit more space for them to expand on their own site rather than acquiring other sites around the city. The Tower of Magdalen is a particularly famous landmark, and every year on the 1st of May the college chapel choir sings May morning hymns at dawn from the top of that tower, and it's kind of a very popular and famous festival here. The college itself was founded in the early 15th century. Some of its famous students, well, I mentioned already C.S. Lewis and his friendship with Tolkien, meeting in the Eagle and Child pub. He was a professor of English, and he lived and worked here in Magdalen College. Later in his career, actually, he moved to what in Oxford is known as the other place. That's what we call Cambridge, site of our other very ancient university in England. Please excuse me while I get across the road. Another great writer and humorist, very quotable man, Oscar Wilde. He was also a student at Magdalen, as was King Edward VIII of England. It was King Edward VIII who abdicated in 1936 to be so that he could marry the divorced Wallis Simpson, the love of his life. But he'd previously studied at Magdalen College as well. And up ahead of us, here's a bridge. This is a bridge over one of the two rivers that meet at Oxford. The rivers that meet here are called the Cherwell and the Thames. The Thames, obviously a very famous river because it flows through London, but in Oxford the Thames is not known as the Thames. For ever and a day, the Thames as it flows through Oxford is known as the Isis. That's because the Latin name of the Thames, and remember Latin was the academic language for many centuries, the Latin name of the Thames was the Thamesis. Unfortunately, Isis is not really an ideal name these days. It's a little bit unfortunate, but that's what the name of the Thames is. Here we are looking at the beautiful entranceway to Oxford Botanic Gardens. This is a fantastic oasis of calm within the city, founded in the 17th century as a garden for plants for the scientific, particularly the medical faculties of the university, so that they could study botany and the science of plants, and particularly the healing properties of plants, which were the basis of medicine at the time. So it was originally called the Physic Garden, so its associations with medicine. And within the botanical garden today is a beautiful rose garden that was laid out in honour of the work of scientists in Oxford, including Alexander Fleming, in the development of penicillin during the 20th century. So those scientific efforts marked by a beautiful rose garden within the Botanic Garden. And if you are in Oxford, it's definitely a beautiful place to get some peace and quiet, maybe get a lovely packed lunch from one of the markets or independent shops along the high street, and go and enjoy eating your lunch outdoors in the sunshine in the Botanic Garden. Not that I'm giving you a hint to what I might be doing after I finish showing you around the city today, of course. Now we are in one of the quieter bits of the city now. The city centre itself is very compact within those medieval city walls, and we are outside them here. Botanical Gardens on our left hand side, academic buildings to our right, and we are soon going to go onto a path that runs alongside an area known as Christchurch Meadows. And this is an area of meadow and nowadays college sports grounds, very close to the rivers. And there's again a lovely, slightly quieter spot. Also a spot where you have a gate that is designed to prevent bicycles from getting through. So people carrying a bag and trying to film is also can be a little bit interesting, but always tells me whether I need to go on a diet, how easily I get through the gate onto Christchurch Meadow. Here we have some of the sports grounds laid out. One of the ways that the colleges compete against one another is on the sports fields, of course. All kinds of sports, whether that's football or soccer as you may know it, rugby, cricket, athletics, and one of the most popular sports that takes place just on the other side of the meadows, because that's where the rivers are, is rowing. Rowing has a massive tradition here in Oxford, and every year the Oxford rowing team compete against Cambridge in London on the Thames in what is known as the University Boat Race. Now on these meadows in 1784, a man by the name of James Sadler attracted a big crowd. And the reason he attracted a big crowd was because he was conducting the first manned hot air balloon flight in England. So a little while before, 2 years before, the Montgolfier brothers had started doing this down in France. And here in England, James Sadler conducted the first manned hot air balloon flight from the meadows. 1784. Now here we are walking alongside remnants of the medieval town wall of Oxford, and you can see in front of us some of the little defensive towers. Actually, it was built as a fortification to protect the town against attack, if such a thing could have been coming. And the interesting thing is that whenever a college acquired land that was adjoining the medieval town wall, as part of the permission that they got from the leaders of the town to establish their college in that spot, they undertook an obligation to maintain their section of the town walls forevermore. So that still is, in force 700, 600, whatever years later. And every year, the mayor of Oxford and some of the other dignitaries of the town, they come along and they inspect the medieval walls. They walk around where the medieval walls was and what's left of it, and they check that the colleges are actually keeping up their end of the bargain and are maintaining the medieval walls. I don't know what the punishment would be if the colleges were to fail in their duty. I don't think any of them have ever tried. That'd be interesting to see whether the monetary fine they got would have been adjusted for 800 years of inflation and interest. I don't know. So we're here alongside now Merton College. Now this is the third of the three colleges alongside Balliol and University that has that claim to be the oldest. Founded again in the 1260s, right on the edge of the medieval town on the walls here. So it's one of the colleges that has this obligation to look after the town walls, which, to give credit to the college, it has been doing quite successfully for 750 years now. The windows at the top there, we can see jutting out, the bay windows. They were the college rooms of J.R.R. Tolkien. So that's where he was working during the time when he was writing The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings and all of his other fantasy literature. He didn't live in college because he was married, so he lived in and had a family. He lived in a house outside the city centre, but generally if a member of the academic staff, a tutor, a professor is single or divorced or whatever, they would live, probably be offered rooms in college, and they could live and work there. But if they have a family, they don't live these days anymore in college. In fact, this tradition that dated from the time when the colleges were essentially monasteries 800 years ago, of having male unmarried students and academic staff, that was something that continued until the 19th century, and it was only in the 19th century that Oxford academics were allowed to marry, or more, perhaps turn it around, that married people were allowed to become Oxford academics. So these rules and traditions lasted an awful long time, but these days things are a little bit more modern, as you might expect. Otherwise they'd probably, despite having the academic reputation and all the history, they'd probably struggle to get the top students and the top academic staff if these literally medieval rules were still in place. So as we walk along this side of the meadow, let's have a look back along the meadow past Merton College to the tower of Magdalen College that we walked along before. Beautiful view. And one of the things you might see from time to time around the college here, closer to the river, are cattle. Seems a strange thing to have close to the centre of a modern city, but again, when the colleges established their bases here, they had to make certain agreements with the town authorities, and some of the local people around Oxford, which at that time was pretty small, a market town but very small, one of the rights that certain people had was to graze their cattle on the meadows close to the rivers, and they had to be respected by the collegers. You know what? I think we're going to be very, very lucky today. Because the number of times I walk through here with a group of visitors and I tell them that people can graze their cattle on the meadows, and it's something they sometimes give me a look as if to say, are you sure about that, Ian? But you know, today I think we might actually be able to see some. How about that? I'm so pleased. Oh, can you? Let's have a look. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. Oh, see the cattle grazing under the trees there down by the river. Proves that I'm telling you the truth. People do still have their ancient rights to graze cattle on Christchurch Meadows. Now, Christchurch Meadow, this part is called because it belongs to the largest college, one of the wealthiest colleges, probably one of the most famous colleges in Oxford. That is Christchurch, of which this beautiful 19th century building is actually the back entrance. Most of the colleges, this would be kind of their grand entrance, I suppose you'd say, but not Christchurch. Christchurch, everything is on a little bit of a grander scale. 13 British Prime Ministers have graduated from Oxford while being members of Christchurch College. Numerous famous politicians and diplomats and writers and scientists and so on. It has a very, very illustrious history. One of the most famous professors and residents here is not necessarily known for his work in his academic field. He was a man named Charles Ludwig Dodgson, and he wrote books that have become loved by generations under the name Lewis Carroll. He wrote Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, and these kinds of fantasy and very imaginative stories. Carroll spent practically his whole life living here. He moved here first as an undergraduate and then did his further studies and accepted a position as a mathematics professor at Oxford and continued to live and be an academic staff member here at Christchurch. And Alice, who the books are based on, was the daughter of his friend who was the head of the college, and he and one of his group of other friends, they used to take Alice and her sister out on little trips on the river and around the countryside, and Lewis Carroll would tell them stories to keep them entertained, and he'd use the names of the girls, particularly Alice, in the stories, and that's where the ideas came from. Christchurch was originally the site of a monastery, so there was a very, very ancient monastery on this site dating back about 1300, 1400 years. So it is one of the oldest sites of community and education and religion within Oxford, actually. The college itself was founded on the site of a former monastery by a very important man at the court of King Henry VIII. His name was Cardinal Wolsey. Cardinal Wolsey was a cardinal of the Roman Catholic Church, so he had a lot of religious power, but he was also the chief minister of England for Henry VIII, so a very important political figure as well. When he fell out of favour with the king, all of his possessions were seized by King Henry. So that included his property, his money, his houses, his titles, and the college at Oxford that he had recently founded, which at that time was called Cardinal College. And King Henry refounded it. He didn't refound it as King's College, because I think he realised that King's College in Cambridge was already a really famous college, and he didn't want people to get confused. And it was refounded as Christchurch College, and that's what it's been ever since. So it has two founders, Wolsey and Henry VIII. After the Reformation, a lot of changes came in terms of our religion, but all of the colleges retained their chapels, but they were switched over from being Catholic to being Church of England, Protestant, except for Christ churches. That also changed from being Catholic, but the college chapel of Christ Church became Oxford Cathedral. And, so it's a unique arrangement that the college chapel of Christ Church is also a cathedral. Now this is some more of Christ Church with the memorial gardens, the building you can see ahead of you with the spikes and the windows. That's the main dining hall, which was the model for the dining hall of Hogwarts in the Harry Potter movies. They wanted to film here actually, but because it's an active college and the ancient building didn't really lend itself too well to a modern film crew, they built an exactly dimensioned replica of it in the studios to use for the films. So we are going to head out of the quiet zone into the slightly louder zone. Another of those roads where buses are allowed to travel. So I do sometimes wonder how many guests on my tours have lined up the perfect shot of some of Oxford's wonderful architecture, only to have it ruined by a double-decker bus driving past at an inopportune moment. I guess that's one of the beauties of digital photography. You can just hit delete. Now the interesting thing about Christ Church is that it's never referred to as Christ Church College. It is always just referred to as Christ Church. I don't know why. There are many, many traditions in Oxford that if someone says why, that's not a question that anybody within the last several hundred years can answer. Because it's Oxford, because it's tradition, is generally the answer. Now what I'm going to do is cross over the road so we can get a beautiful look at one of the landmarks of Christ Church, and that is Christ Church entrance, which features this magnificent tower. This magnificent tower was built by Sir Christopher Wren, and it's called Tom Tower, and that's because of the bell that it houses, a 4-ton bell called Great Tom. Now interestingly, Great Tom is a bell that seems to have changed gender. The bell was brought here from a former Roman Catholic monastery during the Reformation, and in that monastery the bell had been known as Great Mary. I guess that they didn't want to have such a Roman Catholic reference when they moved it here, so they redesignated that bell as Great Tom. So it's the gender of the bell changed, and it's been Great Tom ever since. Now remember I said that Oxford's cathedral was the college chapel of Christ Church, and there it is. There's the tower of the cathedral, and here we also see a beautiful courtyard of Christ Church, the immaculate lawns, the lovely fountain, and this is the main entrance, but this is the entrance only for academic staff, for students, and for anyone who's actually going to worship in the cathedral. If you're a visitor, you go in the side entrance down by the meadows where we were before. And I don't know if you could see it on the camera, but there was a security person keeping a very, very close eye on me. The security personnel at some of these colleges are very strict. But I know from experience that if I'm filming in that entranceway to Christ Church and my camera, not even my body, my camera goes a couple of centimetres over the line that says no people beyond this point, the security guard will sometimes come out of their office and tell me to step back. They are very, very strict. And there's one very important rule if you ever visit Christchurch. It's if the security people, who all wear little bowler hats, they have a very distinctive uniform, if they tell you to do something, do it. Now we've come almost in a huge circle now, because we're almost right back in the centre of the modern city of Oxford, the shopping centre. We began on Cornmarket Street, and we're going to be very soon back at the end of Cornmarket Street again. Before we arrive there are a couple of other things I do want to show you. And one of them we're going to see in a moment when we emerge from behind the bus shelters. And that is another reminder that Oxford isn't just about the university. It is a working town, and this is the town hall. So this is the site of Oxford's public administration, the offices of the local council and the mayor. And very impressive building, kind of built, I think, as an attempt to rival some of those hugely dominating university buildings of medieval times. This is built as the town's response to that in many ways in the 19th century, when Oxford achieved the status of a city, which is something that happens by a royal charter. So the king or queen at the time designates a place as a city, and that gives it certain privileges and gives it a certain status. And Oxford was changed from a town to a city in the 19th century. Now we're at the meeting point of Four Roads, and this meeting point of Four Roads is known as Carfax, which is a strange name. The car bit comes from the French quatre, four, so it was four ways. This direction, this is the High Street, we walked along there. This direction leads us into the modern shopping centre, the Westgate shopping centre, a lot of modernisation. Straight ahead of us is Cornmarket Street, which takes us to the North Gate, where we began by St Michael's Church, and right here at Carfax is the tower of St Martin's Church. This is one of the most important medieval churches of Oxford, of which only the tower remains. It's one of several vantage points in Oxford that you can climb. Here, St Michael's at the North Gate and the University Church of St Mary's are all places where you can take a deep breath, clamber up the steps, and you are rewarded with beautiful shots from the top over the rooftops of Oxford, and you can see many of what gave Oxford one of its nicknames, the City of Dreaming Spires. So I hope you have enjoyed our walk around Oxford today. It is a fantastic city. I hope you've had a good introduction to it, and I hope that if you are getting the chance at some stage to come to Oxford, giving you some ideas and a few great things to look out for to make your stay even better. Just as a reminder, you can contact me on social media is the best way. It's IAB Tours, India Alpha Bravo Tours, and my name's Ian, and it has been a pleasure to welcome you to Oxford today and to share this beautiful historic English city with you. I wish you all the very best wherever in the world you are watching from. Stay safe, happy travelling, and I hope to see you in Oxford sometime soon.